We've talked about incident investigation, root cause analysis. I want to turn to a subject related to making corrections for safety and talk about that for a little bit, and then we'll move towards the wrap-up of our program. We said it earlier, I just want to emphasize, we have a choice as we face what to do when things go wrong. We can, like my daughter, very cleverly cut the tops off the dandelions and get rid of those fussy yellow flowers and make Dad happy. And Dad was happy until a week or two later I noticed things keep going up in the same places. So we can buy ourselves a little time by taking short-term actions. We can window dress problems. If we want to get out of doing that, we've got to address the long-term issues. And that's our goal. And that means making permanent countermeasures, system changes that address root cause. So I'm going to just give you a laundry list. You've got it all. There's no animation on your documents you have in front of you, so you already know these things that I'm going to give you. But as you dig into systems that drive operational problems that lead to hazards, here are the systems that typically end up being a bit defective in a typical manufacturing outfit. You guys need to look at your own systems, so one of them is competence. How do we make sure that people know the right way to do the job? Especially when they're put on a crew with a bunch of old hands that knows how to turn out 10 units in X number of hours, and they got to keep up. I don't know about you, but on-the-job training often is on-the-job, no training. And that has to be systematically wiped out because we're asking for trouble, and we're getting it if we don't have people competent to do the job and do it safely at the rate it needs to be done in order to keep up. Maintenance, the care and feeding of equipment and tooling and fixtures and all those kinds of things often lead to safety problems. They can hurt people if we don't take care of our equipment. That also includes changing out bits on hand tools and other types of hand tools that stuff wears out on that needs to be taken care of, because when it wears out, it's often unsafe, and it's not the job of the operator to remember how many times they slammed that router into a laminated sheet of wallboard to make a hole. So we need to have that. We need to have paperwork that at least can be used during training to explain the right way to do things, so we have something that most organizations call standard work. The right way to do it. It may not be perfect, it may not be the very best way that anybody has ever figured out, but it's the best way that we know how to do that job now and safely. And that needs to be written down somewhere. If you believe that your 60-some-year-olds who've been doing it all the time are the repository of your information has a lifetime of only a couple of years, and then it's going to leave. So it's got to be written down somewhere. And those young engineers coming in to help you design pretty trailers that everybody wants to buy do not have that information. They do not know how to do process design. Somebody's got to know how to do process design, because that's where people are getting hurt. So, documentation system. Our factory management system, and I'm talking about things like where stuff is located, the overall layout of the facility, the flow through, how materials get to line side so they can be added on, and what do you do with the scrap and the trash and the cut off pieces and all that stuff, which ends up on the floor. Process planning, I already talked about. Tooling and equipment control. So when we have problems with competence system, we end up seeing the evidence in untrained, unskilled people on the line, And maybe you've got some trainers that are trying to help people, but also do a job at the same time. And it doesn't work long term. There's got to be some investment in your people to help them feel competent and confident. That's two different words, right? Competent and confident to do their jobs safely and at rate. Come on. When we don't have good preventive maintenance systems, what happens? We have equipment failures. We got people taking activities to deal with that problem that may or may not be qualified to deal with it. People do workarounds. Oh, that machine isn't working, so we'll do it by hand, and then somebody gets hurt. All kinds of things like that. And of course, we got to make sure, and should be on your PM lists, to verify that alarms and protective measures and guards are there and working. I don't know how many times I've walked through facilities where the covers have been left off of a piece of equipment because the maintenance guy was busy and figured the production guys would put that cover back on. No, that's the job of the maintenance guy. You open the machine, you close it, and you make sure it's all buttoned up and safe before you leave. But that has to be an accountability factor for your maintenance crew. If you don't have instructions or reference manuals, you're going to have people figuring out what to do, making notes on themselves. I've walked around a few of the facilities that I had a privilege to walk around. I won't tell you who they were, but I see notes on toolboxes. I see little scribbles of stuff on machines. I see marker indications on pieces of plywood that are part of the table where people have made instructions for themselves about how to do the job. That is nuts. There's no revision control for that, by the way, right? There's no authority reviewing those procedures to make sure that they're right, that they produce a quality product, and they do it on time and safe. It's just stuff that people made up because they're trying to make you happy and they're doing the best thing they can. And they shouldn't be blamed for that, but that's a system failure to not give people the tools that they need to do the job. Factory management, no time set aside for housekeeping, no enforcement of any particular rules when we're in a hurry. When we're not in a hurry, it's really important, but when we're in a hurry, when sales are up, all bets are off, and that's really hypocritical. You can read that. And a lot of stuff that I see is really, it's craft. We know how it's supposed to look at the end, and we've asked our people to figure out the best way to do it. And because they are relatively ingenious, because they have a high sense of personal excellence, they try to do the best job they can with the amount of time that we give them. And unfortunately, factored into all that is their own sense of personal safety, which may be quite different from our sense of risk and hazard. And people get hurt that way. They get hurt in their garage when they work on their own, and they get hurt when they're doing it X number of times every hour or every day. As we attempt to do root cause analysis and we ask ourselves, why, we go through system causes and then we get to management issues. And these are no surprise. Management's responsible. They got the money. They have the ability, because of their position and authority, they have the ability to assign resources, to say who gets this much stuff, who gets what purchase requisition signed. And so that's an issue. The inability or the failure to drive Plan, Do, Check, Act, to actually confirm what's going on with a metric that's not performing and take appropriate action and make sure that that experience is fed into the next planning cycle, that's a management responsibility. And failure to do that means we don't learn from our mistakes. We don't horizontally apply something. Here's a facility. It had a big safety issue. They figure out the right thing to do to fix it. And then this division and that division and that division of the same big company don't hear anything about it. Why? Because they're all in competition and they're trying to make more money from each other. That's stupid. It's short-sighted. And it's inappropriate for people that put people first over every other priority. Well, there's priority setting and inadequate feedback and inadequate responsibility determination and authority. These are management issues that as you dig down into the causes of why bad things happen, you will end up at things like this. And they'll be observed by having very tiny budgets and little competent resources focused on safety, or not having safety metrics visible to the facility as one of perhaps the most important metric of company health and performance. We might have issues where supervisors and shop floor people are deciding that speed is more important than quality, or that output is more important than quality, or a cost target is more important than safety. Maybe our supervisors are trying to do a good job and they don't really know what management wants. Or maybe they have a dim idea of what they want. If we have the vision and values that we talked about earlier, then they have to be communicated through that process we described as engagement. It's got to get to everybody. So supervisors can confidently say, this is what this company stands for, and I'm going to make this decision that prioritizes safety, and I'm going to have my boss have my back when I make that decision. Perhaps I'm running a line, and it's already got a bad record of hurting people, and I just saw a near miss, and I've had it, and I'm going to shut that down and not run that until it gets addressed. And if I get yelled at for doing that, then I'm sorry, you can't have safety. We need to help people understand what their responsibilities are, and inadequate responsibility determination is a management problem that needs to be addressed at the highest levels. And then the authority to do things. They make the big bucks because they have the resources, the ability to make decisions that influence really important things. Okay. Operational causes. These are the specific hazards that are identified in the shop. And, the first thing we generally think of when we think of safety is the use of personal protective equipment like safety glasses. And in fact, somewhat it's true that our initial response, our initial reaction to having a problem is we need to guard people by putting something on them, making them do something that keeps them from that hazard. And I get that. And even I said, and believe still, that perhaps we should be wearing steel-toed shoes, at least in some job functions, as we build trailers. But what I'd like you to do is to be familiar with this chart, which is kind of standard safety training material, but I introduce it here because it's talking about what are effective corrective actions. And so in the world of safety and the body of knowledge associated with safety engineering, they teach the hierarchy of controls. And I think it's important for us to just appreciate it for a second. So the first thing is this is one of these upside down triangles, and personal protective equipment is down at the bottom, not the top. Because it's actually the least effective control that we can put in place because it depends on the operator to remember to do what we ask him to do. So in the quality world, there are two statistics that are well established as far as human reliability. The first is so people make two mistakes if you want to simplify, maybe oversimplify. They make acts of omission and they make acts of commission, okay? So they forget stuff and they do stuff that nobody thought they'd do, but they just did it anyway, right? The standard rate that human reliability is set up to have is 1 time in 100 is the frequency of forgetting, of acts of omission, 1 in 100. And that can be influenced by a number of bad supervisory factors, like no instructions, poor supervision, impaired human, they forget more because they're on Sudafed and they're kind of hazy today, whatever, okay? But the basic rate is 1 in 100. So I'm sorry, but that's not good enough for safety, okay? Acts of commission, by the way, is 3 in 1,000 is the standard rate for doing things which are not prescribed, even with a procedure that they just did because, I don't know, they spaced out, did something that they weren't supposed to do. Personal protective equipment is at the bottom of the hierarchy of controls. It is also not only the least effective, but it's the easiest for us to manage because it just takes a little money to provide hearing protection, foot protection, eye protection, whatever. A step above that is somewhat more successful at permanently managing a hazard is to change the way people work. Perhaps we want to revise the number of hours that a person in a consecutive manner works on a particular job so that they're not so fatigued with that particular task and therefore less prone to a shoulder strain or a wrist injury or something else. We can apply administrative controls that change the way people work without actually changing the process or the equipment or any of that stuff, but just change the way people work. Procedural things. That can be effective, and it generally is more effective than just personal protective equipment, particularly by itself. The next is engineering controls like guarding to isolate people from the hazards. Makes sense, right? It's more built in, it's less error prone, and it less depends on a human doing the right thing. Climbing up the chain, we can substitute the hazard to something that's less prone to challenge or to injury. And finally, we can just eliminate that process that creates the hazard, and that'll take care of it. We can't always do that, but that's the most effective way to get rid of a hazard is to just not do that thing that creates that hazard. Well, this is a little bit theoretical, but you can kind of see where we're at. Let me try to illustrate with an actual example that it doesn't specifically pick something precisely from your world, but is intended to kind of help you get the idea. So here's a laminating machine. And laminating machines, they kind of use heat and perhaps some adhesive to glue big sheets together. You guys do stuff like that. And here's the sheets. They come out hot, okay? Hot enough to, burn you, particularly if you're hanging onto these sheets at any length of time. And, of course, the adhesives and the materials and the fact that they're hot can lead to all sorts of dermatological problems, skin issues. So there's some hazards associated with this job. How do we deal with that? Well, let's walk through the hierarchy of controls to see our options for that. So there's the hierarchy of controls off to the side there, with PPE down at the bottom, administrative controls, engineering controls, and so forth. And there's my picture of the laminating machine up to remind us what we're talking about. So the first thing you want to do that people are, just naturally think of is, okay, we're going to have everybody wear gloves. It's hot, so they're going to wear gloves. Now, this could be a little interactive, but do you think that they're always going to wear gloves? I don't know about you, but I hate wearing gloves. I like the tactile feel of what I'm doing. In fact, a lot of operators, you'll soon discover, will cut all the tips of their gloves off because they like feeling stuff, and they'll think they'll get mostly the same protection. They won't, but that's what they feel, right? So Ralph lost his gloves. He left them in his toolbox. He put them in his car, and he doesn't want to go out and get them. And so there's people that are working without gloves all the time. And unless you want to be the police associated with, you can see the problems. Okay, this is easy. We feel good about doing this, but it's not very effective all the time. Well, okay. So we're going to put everybody on a 2-hour rotation schedule. Now, we might still require them to wear gloves, but we're only going to have them do the job 2 hours at a time. That'll give their hands time to cool off. And besides, in the summer, you guys don't air condition your factories in every area anyway. It'll give them a little break and be a little more environmentally nice. And that's an administrative control. Okay? Now, what happens when somebody's sick? They're going to have to work there 4 hours, or maybe they're going to work full 8 hours because there's nobody else to rotate with them. So administrative controls sound nice. They look good on paper. And sometimes they can be effective if they're rigidly managed, but they aren't always, and that's why they're only second least effective. Okay, so, what do I do? Well, an engineering control, and I'm just making stuff up, trying to come up with a decent example, but maybe before the operators touch these things, we can have them run a little longer and put fans on so that these objects are not so hot when they have to be manipulated by hand. Now, that's an example of an engineering control. And like the name implies, an engineering control means you're probably going to have an engineer, somebody with skills at making stuff and screwing with controls and whatnot, to address this. And yes, this is now a higher cost thing. But it's more built in. It doesn't rely on people anymore. And yes, you probably have to maintain those fans. You might have to add an item or two on your PM list. But it is in the direction of an error-proofing of this process to prevent the hazards associated with handling these hot sheets. Substitution would change the process so you don't have to make it hot anymore. I'll use a cold bond process. Yes, they have to handle the sheets. They're still as heavy, but they're not going to be hot. Now, is that feasible? I don't know. People do a lot of amazing stuff. Maybe we just never investigated the option to do it a different way. Or maybe we feel like, as bosses, that we've got so much capital investment in these hot laminating machines that we don't want to change to cold bond. Maybe it's just sloth. Maybe those things have been fully depreciated for years and we just don't want to invest in safety. I don't know. That's a question you got to ask yourselves. But that's an example of substitution. And that's very effective, right? And then maybe we could just buy stuff that we don't have to put together like that. That would be eliminating the hazard altogether. That's the difference between elimination and substitution. Okay? Now, is this a perfect example? Probably not. You can probably cut holes in it. The point is, the less we depend on people, the less that we put the responsibility for safety into the hands of people that are prone to make mistakes, prone to have influences on them that have them make decisions that aren't always in their best interest from a safety perspective, the more permanent, the more effective our corrective actions are going to be. Everybody get that? Hierarchy of controls. So, in summary, wrapping up this section, if you do a decent job of investigation, you're going to look beyond the symptoms to the operational causes. The example we had of the oil on the floor, we get to the place where we start looking at pumps and gaskets and stuff on the floor that led to a problem that caused a hazard. that made somebody get hurt. But if you stop at operational causes, you are going to discover that other operational causes keep cropping up from the same root. Because while you got it down an inch or two on that dandelion stem, you didn't get it all the way down. Because there are system issues, such as not really having a very good competence system, or not having a very good PM system, that will be the fertile ground from which many other troubles come. So you want to dig down to system causes and then ask the hard questions of management. And many of you are managers in here. You have to look in the mirror and say, what is my commitment to safety? And how am I fleshing that out by decisions that I make with my money, with my organizational responsibilities, with my personal presence, with my communications? These little sermonettes could allow me to talk for a very long time, but I think I've covered these subjects. Corrective action is the healing mechanism of the organization, and it's the opportunity to learn stuff. Corrective action, when properly applied, connects learning to the next planning cycle, so we do a better job at process and product design. That's a commitment to our people that forces us to do things that will really help us in the long term.